If you ask most people whether they should start with stocks or real estate, they think they are asking an investment question. A lot of the time they are not. They are asking a psychological question. They saw somebody else making money somewhere, and now their own mind has suddenly decided that this is the thing they should have been paying attention to all along. A friend flips a property. A cousin buys an index fund. A co-worker brags about rental income. A neighbor talks about how much his portfolio is up. And just like that, the brain does what it always does when something becomes emotionally relevant. It starts seeing that thing everywhere. That is not insight. That is attention waking up. That is the mother line. The biggest mistake beginners make is not choosing the wrong asset first. It is choosing under the influence of urgency, envy, and other people's recent success instead of choosing based on what their own first stage actually requires. And what your first stage requires is not glamour. It is competence. It is liquidity. It is a margin for error large enough that one mistake does not poison your whole future relationship with investing. That is why if you are truly at the beginning, I do not start with real estate. I start with stocks. Not because real estate is bad, because real estate is powerful, and powerful tools in untrained hands can become very expensive very quickly. Let me make this plain. A beginner does not mainly need the investment with the biggest upside story. A beginner needs the investment that teaches the fastest, punishes the least, and still lets capital survive long enough to become intelligent. That is what stocks can do better at the start. This is the first mechanism I want you to understand. I call it the skin in the game accelerator. Most people think learning happens before ownership. They think they are supposed to watch 10 more videos, read 3 more threads, listen to 4 more podcasts, and then one day they will feel ready enough to enter the market as a fully informed creature of reason. That is not how competence usually works. Competence often begins the moment something becomes your problem. Buy a few shares of Coca-Cola and suddenly dividends matter, earnings reports matter, valuation matters, business quality matters. The news about the company starts looking less like abstract content and more like relevant information. Before ownership, a P/E ratio is trivia. After ownership, it has weight. Before ownership, a dividend date is a phrase. After ownership, it is cash arriving. That is how the brain works. The moment you have something real at stake, attention sharpens, pattern recognition wakes up. Questions get more serious. The subject becomes personal enough that learning stops feeling academic and starts becoming useful. That is what I want in the beginning. Not maximum return, maximum educational value per unit of risk. And that brings me to the second reason. Liquidity. This is not a small, it is one of the most underappreciated forms of protection in all of finance. If you buy a stock today and discover 3 months from now that you need the cash, you can usually sell it and be done. Maybe you sell for a gain, maybe for a loss, but the asset is liquid. The machine lets you out. If you buy a rental property today and realize 3 months from now that the timing was wrong, the conversation changes immediately. Now you are dealing with a process, agents, repairs, buyers, financing, appraisals, delays, maybe a weak local market, maybe a bad tenant, maybe a property issue nobody told you about until it became yours. What you thought was an investment can quickly start behaving like an obligation. That is the second mechanism. I call it the beginner's margin. A beginner does not need perfect safety. A beginner needs enough flexibility that an early mistake does not become a major life event. That is what stocks usually give you better than direct real estate ownership. And that is why I start there, because I have watched too many people take their first $20,000 or $30,000, buy one mediocre property in a market they barely understand, and then discover that roofs leak, tenants stop paying, HVAC systems die in August, insurance goes up, taxes go up, legal issues appear, and what looked like passive income on a spreadsheet has turned into a live fire exercise. That is not the first lesson I want you getting. Not because those things are rare, because they are normal. Real estate is not bad because it can do damage. Real estate is dangerous for beginners because it can do damage before they have the capital, the reserves, the reps, or the emotional steadiness to absorb it correctly. That matters. Now let us talk about why I still love real estate, because I do not want the wrong idea spreading from this. Real estate remains one of the greatest wealth building tools in the entire code of capitalism. The tax treatment can be phenomenal. The leverage can be phenomenal. The control can be phenomenal. The depreciation rules, the long-run appreciation, the cash flow, the refinancing options, the possibility of exchanging and compounding, all of that is very real. I am not against real estate, far from it. I am against starting in the deepest part of the pool before you have learned how water works. That is a very different thing. This is the third mechanism. I call it the sequence advantage. The real question is not whether stocks are better than real estate forever. The real question is which one should come first. If your first job is to become a durable allocator instead of a hopeful amateur, my answer is still stocks. Because stocks let you learn with smaller consequences. If you buy quality businesses, especially businesses with long records of profitability, durability, and dividend discipline, you are entering an environment where mistakes are usually educational rather than catastrophic. That is a gift. And if you do it properly, you are not gambling. You are not buying random tickers because your brother-in-law heard something at the gym. You are not chasing message, board excitement, or whatever people are saying is going to the moon next week. You are learning how to recognize business quality. Does the company make real money? Does it generate cash? Does it pay owners? Has it increased those payments over time? Is revenue stable? Is the valuation at least within a range where optimism has not completely eaten the return? Can you generate more than one stream of income from the position through options? If you know what you are doing, that is why I like quality dividend paying stocks for beginners. Not because dividends are magical, because they force the investor to think like an owner earlier. They turn the market from a casino into a yield producing machine. They help the investor understand the difference between a business that exists and a business that rewards owners. That is a crucial distinction. Now I want to zoom out, because the source document's most valuable idea is not actually stocks first. Its most valuable idea is that lasting wealth usually ends up being built across several buckets, not one. I agree with that deeply. The fourth mechanism is what I call the durable allocation model. People who build real wealth rarely stay stuck in one lane forever. They build cash flow from different sources. They diversify not only by ticker or geography, but by structure. One part in income producing stocks, one part in real estate, one part in managed or outsourced exposure, maybe funds, ETFs, syndications, or professional strategies, and one part in cash or cash equivalents, the boring reserve nobody brags about and everybody misses when they do not have it. That is how I think about it. Not because the percentages themselves are sacred, because the principle is strong. Wealth that survives is usually wealth that does not depend on one move, one market, one tenant, one CEO, one rate cut, or one story. This is why I do not want beginners going all in on real estate just because they saw a few glamorous examples. I also do not want them going all in on the stock market without any thought to cash reserves. Future real estate, or other forms of managed exposure. You are not trying to win the next month. You are trying to build a personal balance sheet that can survive decades. That requires structure. Now, here is where people get confused. If stocks are the starting point, does that mean real estate has to wait until you are rich? No, not at all. It just means real estate should enter in a form your capital base and skill level can actually support. That is the fifth mechanism. I call it real estate entry control. There are smarter first steps into real estate than, boy, a random single-family rental and hope. House hacking is one of them. Live in one part of the property, rent the rest. And let the structure train you while also housing you. That is very different from buying a distant rental blind, buying a modest place, improving it, living in it, and then selling after enough time to capture favorable tax treatment. Can be another wonderful way to learn. You are still building equity, still learning the rhythms of ownership, still dealing with contractors and value creation, but you are doing it through a structure that serves your life directly, rather than through a pure investment property that can punish you more aggressively. And then there are REITs. Real estate investment trusts are deeply underrated as training wheels. They let people own real estate exposure with the liquidity of a stock. They let you study property economics, management quality, yield, and sector dynamics without forcing you to become a landlord before you are ready. That is not fake real estate. That is simply a cleaner first layer. It is real estate exposure without the worst beginner risks. I like that. And I like it especially for people who think they have to choose one world completely and reject the other. They do not. The point is not ideological purity. The point is intelligent sequencing. Now let me say something most people do not want to hear. A lot of beginners are not actually choosing between stocks and real estate. They are choosing between learning and fantasizing. That is the real battle. This is the sixth mechanism. I call it the fantasy premium. A beginner can sound extremely sophisticated talking about cap rates, forced appreciation, BRR strategies, cash on, cash returns, syndications, options income, dividend aristocrats, and all the other vocabulary people collect before they have much real money at risk. That vocabulary can make them feel advanced. It can also be a shield against action, because some people would rather feel informed than become competent. But competence is earned differently. You get competent by owning something sensible, paying attention, making some manageable mistakes, reviewing what happened, and then doing the next thing better. That is how adults learn, not by stacking terminology until they sound investable. This is why I often tell people that the first goal is not making a fortune. The first goal is becoming the type of person who knows how money behaves. Once you know that, fortunes become much easier to build. Without that, even lucky gains usually do not stick. Now let us get practical. If I were guiding someone early in their journey, I would want to see a few things before they start swinging harder in real estate. Some real liquidity. Not imaginary liquidity. Actual cash or equivalents, a basic habit of investing consistently. Not spurts, a system. A growing understanding of how public assets behave. Some evidence they can hold through volatility without becoming hysterical. And enough reserves that one nasty surprise does not force them into a desperate sale. Those things matter more than excitement, because a property that looks beautiful on a YouTube video can become a financial chokehold if the owner has no reserve discipline behind it. That is what the internet rarely advertises. The internet shows upside. It rarely shows strain. And strain is often what ruins beginners. That brings me to one final distinction I care about a lot. There is a difference between being right and being ready. A person can be completely right that real estate is one of the greatest wealth machines in the world and still be wrong to start there. A person can be completely right that stocks alone will not maximize every possible tax advantage or leverage opportunity and still be right to start there. Why? Because first moves are not judged only by theoretical upside. They are judged by what they do to the person making them. Do they teach well? Do they preserve capital? Do they encourage better habits? Do they create repeatability? Do they make the allocator stronger? That is how I judge first moves. That is the seventh mechanism. I call it capability compounding. The first dollars you invest are doing two jobs at once. Yes, they are trying to make money, but they are also trying to make you more capable. That second job is often more important than the first. If your first investment experience makes you steadier, more observant, more disciplined, more curious, and more deliberate, then even a modest financial result can be a major victory. If your first investment experience makes you overconfident, overleveraged, under-reserved, and emotionally erratic, then even a profitable result can leave you weaker. That is why I respect the starting point so much. Not because it determines everything, because it shapes who you become while doing the next 10 things. So here is where I come down. Start with stocks, not because real estate is inferior, because stocks usually give beginners the best mix of liquidity, skin in the game, pattern recognition, and survivable mistakes. Then, as your capital, reserves, and competence improve, start bringing real estate into the picture in a controlled way. Maybe house hacking, maybe a live in improvement strategy, maybe REITs first, maybe direct ownership later. And as the machine grows, add other buckets too. Managed exposure, cash equivalents, different streams of cash flow, different structures of risk. That is how lasting wealth is actually built. Not by chasing whatever seems hottest, because your brain suddenly started noticing it, but by sequencing your learning and your capital so carefully that each stage makes the next stage safer, smarter, and more powerful. That is what the average person misses. They think the question is stocks or real estate. The better question is, what should I own first if I want my first real experience with money to make me stronger instead of simply making me busy? That is the adult version of the question. The answer becomes much clearer. Start where the damage is lower. Start where the lessons are faster. Start where liquidity can save you if you are wrong. Start where ownership teaches, then graduate. That is how wealth compounds. Not just in dollars, in judgment.